Dr. Chen hurried through the crowded halls of the United Nations Emergency Command Center, data tablet clutched tightly to her chest. Analysts and diplomats rushed past her, their faces drawn with the same fear that had gripped the planet for the past 24 hours. She paused at the security checkpoint, presenting her credentials to the stone-faced guards, who barely glanced at them before waving her through. Inside the main situation room, the atmosphere was suffocating. World leaders and military commanders argued across the circular table while massive screens displayed the hegemony vessels looming above major cities. At 48 hours into the ultimatum, humanity had burned through shock and panic and now teetered between desperation and resignation. Their weaponry alone outclasses our entire defense grid, the Chinese general was saying, pointing to energy readings that made Earth's nuclear arsenal seem like firecrackers. A coordinated strike would be suicide. And surrender guarantees what exactly? Countered the Brazilian president. That we live as pets. As labor. We have historical precedent for what happens when technologically superior forces demand submission. Chen cleared her throat, drawing irritated glances from several delegates. Secretary General Okafor noticed her and nodded slightly. Dr. Chen has been analyzing the hegemony communications. Perhaps she has insights to offer. Chen stepped forward, suddenly aware of how many eyes were on her. She activated her tablet, projecting its contents onto the main screen. The hegemony presents itself as a monolith, but their communications tell a different story. She began, highlighting translation discrepancies in their ultimatum. Their language contains structural markers indicating at least 3 distinct communication styles filtered through a single translation system. More importantly, there are terminological inconsistencies when they reference their own authority structure. What exactly are you suggesting, Doctor? Asked the Russian representative, leaning forward. The hegemony isn't a single unified entity. It's a coalition, and not necessarily a stable one. Chen switched to a frequency analysis. These are subspace transmissions between their vessels. Notice the encrypted channels aren't uniform. They're compartmentalized, suggesting information restrictions even among their own fleet. General Harrison, who had been silent until now, stood up. Though retired, her presence had been requested by multiple nations. You're saying they have internal politics. All militaries do. More than that, Chen replied. I believe their coalition includes subordinate species with differing interests. Look at these communication patterns. They're consistent with hierarchical information control. Some vessels are receiving filtered intelligence. Harrison's eyes narrowed. Second-class citizens in their own armada. Potential leverage, Chen confirmed. And there's something else. She hesitated, aware of how speculative her next point would be. Their translation system struggles with certain human concepts. When we reference individual choice, personal liberty, or cultural diversity, their responses contain computational artifacts, like their algorithms can't properly process these ideas. Cultural blind spots, murmured the Japanese Prime Minister, or ideological vulnerabilities, Harrison added, a spark of something that wasn't quite hope, but wasn't despair either lighting her eyes. Dr. Chen, how confident are you in this analysis? Confident enough to stake Earth's future on it. The words left Chen's mouth before she could reconsider them, but she realized she meant it. The hegemony expects either military resistance, they can crush, or complete capitulation. Their entire conquest protocol seems built around this binary. But what if we could present a third option? Something their system isn't designed to process. For the first time since the massive ships had appeared, the room fell into a thoughtful silence rather than a despairing one. Harrison finally broke it. I think, she said slowly, we need to show the hegemony exactly what makes humans different from every other species they've conquered. And we have less than 48 hours to do it. General Harrison's makeshift command center hummed with activity despite being housed in an abandoned subway maintenance facility 30 meters beneath Manhattan. The location had been chosen specifically because it lay within a natural granite formation that might shield their communications from hegemony surveillance. "We have confirmation that 17 nations have officially surrendered," reported Colonel Dahlman, updating the holographic display where red indicators now covered most of Europe and parts of Asia. China and Russia are maintaining public neutrality while secretly mobilizing. North America, most of South America, and a coalition of African nations are following our protocol. Harrison nodded, studying the map. "And the opportunists?" "Growing in number," Dawn grimaced. "At least 30 high-profile business leaders and politicians have made direct contact with hegemony representatives, offering to serve as regional administrators." "Predictable," Harrison muttered. She turned to the diverse group gathered around the central planning table. Scientists, military strategists, hackers, cultural anthropologists, and communication specialists from dozens of countries. None wore national insignia. Those distinctions had become irrelevant. "The hegemony expects us to fragment exactly like this," she told them, gesturing toward the map. "Their conquest strategy relies on exploiting our divisions, but they've misunderstood something fundamental about humans. Our differences are also our strength." She activated a different display showing the global response network they'd established in the 36 hours since the UN meeting. Thousands of small blue dots pulsed across every continent, each representing an independent team working on a specific aspect of the resistance. Traditional military doctrine would call this chaotic and uncoordinated, Harrison continued. But we're not fighting a traditional war. Each of these teams operates independently, but shares information with the network. No single point of failure. No centralized command structure for the hegemony to target. We're creating something they've never encountered before. Dr. Chen approached with her latest analysis. "We've identified 7 distinct species within the hegemony, based on communication patterns. The dominant species, we're calling them Apex, control most strategic decisions. The others appear to have varying degrees of autonomy, but ultimately answer to Apex command." "Hierarchical thinkers," Harrison nodded, "which means they'll struggle to comprehend our distributed approach." A young programmer from Kenya, Makina Kichiko, raised her hand. "My team has been analyzing their network protocols. They're advanced, but surprisingly rigid. We'd found exploitable patterns in their communication encryption." "Can you get into their systems?" Harrison asked. "Not directly. Their security is beyond our technology. But we can inject noise, create communication shadows, small disruptions that compound over time." Makina's eyes gleamed with the challenge. "Their systems are perfect, which makes them brittle. They don't expect interference and don't adapt well to it." Harrison turned to address the room. "This is exactly what we need. Not grand gestures, but thousands of small actions they can't predict or counter effectively. We're not trying to defeat their military. That's impossible. We're demonstrating that controlling humans is more costly than they anticipated." From the corner, a voice spoke up. Dr. Ishiguro, a philosopher who had been silently observing. "What we're doing goes beyond military strategy. We're presenting a fundamentally different way of existing. The hegemony's conquests have followed a pattern because all previous species responded predictably. But humans," he paused, searching for the right words, "humans are contradictory by nature. We cooperate and compete simultaneously. We're individualistic yet capable of collective action. This paradox is our defense." Harrison nodded. "And our message. When the deadline comes, we won't offer surrender or ineffectual resistance. We'll show them why humanity refuses to kneel, not through bravado, but by demonstrating that our seeming weakness is actually our unbreakable strength." The countdown on the central display showed less than 24 hours remaining until the hegemony's deadline. The observatory in Chile's Atacama Desert had been repurposed into an analysis center, its powerful telescopes now aimed exclusively at the hegemony ships. Dr. Elena Vasquez hadn't slept in 36 hours, her eyes bloodshot but focused as she compiled the latest readings. "There it is again," she murmured, calling her team over. "The energy fluctuation in their shield harmonics. It's subtle, but it occurs across all vessels at precisely 9-hour intervals. Dr. Hernandez leaned closer to the display. Too consistent to be random. Some kind of maintenance cycle. Or an inherent limitation in their technology, Elena suggested. Look at the spectral analysis. Their shield frequency shifts momentarily during the fluctuation. For approximately 1.7 seconds, there's a vulnerability in the lower electromagnetic bands. She transmitted the findings to Harrison's network, where it was immediately routed to engineering teams worldwide. Within hours, responses began flowing back. Theoretical models, prototype designs, adaptation strategies for existing Earth technologies. No single solution, but dozens of complementary approaches feeding off each other, evolving in real time. Meanwhile, in Seoul, Park Jin-woo and his team of hackers had barely moved from their screens in a nondescript office building. They had managed to tap into the peripheral data streams of hegemony communications, not the secure military channels, but the background telemetry and environmental monitoring systems. It's like their technology is conversing with itself, Jin-woo explained during the emergency briefing. His image projected alongside others from across the globe. Every system is constantly reporting status. Ships, weapons, even their environmental controls, all generating data we can intercept. Can they detect your intrusion? Harrison asked. That's the strange part, Jin-woo replied. Their security is focused on deliberate attacks. Passive monitoring doesn't trigger their defenses. It's as if the concept of simply listening doesn't register as a threat. They can't imagine what they consider inferior technology could glean useful intelligence. Dr. Chen added, the pieces falling into place. It's a blind spot in their threat assessment. In Lagos, 16-year-old Ada Bayo Okafor had become an unexpected contributor to humanity's resistance. Not a scientist or soldier, but an observer with a perspective unfiltered by formal training. He had been analyzing footage of the few hegemony troops seen on Earth, massive armor-clad figures establishing monitoring stations in territories that had surrendered. They moved differently than us, he explained to his skeptical handler, who had reluctantly forwarded his observations to the network. Watch their response times during unexpected events. When that dog ran past the patrol in Barcelona, there was a delay before they reacted. Same with the sudden rainstorm in Tokyo. They process, then respond. No improvisation. Harrison's team had initially filed the observation under interesting but low priority, until similar reports emerged from other sources. Combined with the technical data from Chile and Seoul, a pattern began to emerge. The hegemony, for all their technological supremacy, lacked humanity's adaptive unpredictability. They've evolved or engineered for optimization, not adaptation. Dr. Ishiguro theorized during the global strategy session. Each species in their coalition appears specialized for specific functions within a rigid hierarchy, efficient for stable environments, but potentially vulnerable to rapidly changing conditions. Like a chess grandmaster suddenly forced to play a game where the rules change every third move, Harrison said, the beginnings of a genuine strategy forming. With 12 hours remaining before the ultimatum expired, Harrison authorized the final phase of preparation. Teams worldwide began implementing their assigned roles in what they now called Operation Hydra. Not one resistance, but thousands, each capable of acting independently yet part of a greater whole. We won't win a conventional war, Harrison reminded her commanders. But we don't need to. We just need to demonstrate that humanity can't be controlled through conventional means. The demonstration came without warning. One moment, the remote island of Vanuatu in the South Pacific existed. The next, it vanished in a flash of light that temporarily blinded surveillance satellites. When imagery was restored, nothing remained but a perfect circle of churning sea where land had been moments before. No radiation, no debris. Just absence where an island of 12 square kilometers had stood for millennia. In the UN emergency chamber, the broadcast from Supreme Overlord Xan Tukur played on the central screen. His form, 9 feet tall with iridescent scaled skin and multiple eyes arranged in a pattern suggesting evolutionary development for omnidirectional threat assessment, loomed over the assembly. This demonstration utilized 0.01% of standard hegemony arsenal capacity. The translation software rendered in multiple languages. Your deadline expires in 6 standard hours. Further resistance will result in similar actions against populated territories. The chamber erupted in panic. The Secretary General struggled to maintain order as delegates shouted over each other. Several prominent leaders stepped forward, already preparing statements of capitulation. We cannot risk the lives of millions, the EU representative argued, her voice trembling. We must consider the reality of our situation. The Chinese president nodded grimly. We have a responsibility to ensure the survival of our people. Perhaps in time, acceptable terms can be. The main screen flickered, interrupting the hegemony broadcast. For a moment, delegates assumed it was a technical malfunction before recognizing the face that replaced Xantacor's, General Maya Harrison. To all world leaders and citizens of Earth, she began, her calm voice cutting through the chaos. You've witnessed the hegemony's power and heard their threats. They expect these demonstrations to break our will, because that strategy has worked on countless worlds before ours. She paused, her expression resolute. But they don't understand what makes humans different. Throughout our history, we have faced extinction-level threats from nature, from each other, from our own technology. Each time, we've adapted and survived, not because we were strongest, but because we refused to accept inevitability. From her hidden command center, Harrison could see the feed was reaching not just the UN, but had overridden communications worldwide. Global resistance teams had seized broadcast networks simultaneously, ensuring her message reached everyone. The hegemony believes we have 2 choices: fight and die, or kneel and live as subjects. They cannot conceive of other possibilities, because their thinking is constrained by millennia of successful conquest. But humanity has always excelled at finding third options. The broadcast split to show Operation Hydra activating globally, thousands of coordinated actions too dispersed to track or counter. Harrison continued, "We will not meet their strength with strength. We will not surrender our future to fear. Instead, we offer something the hegemony has never encountered, a species that cannot be conquered because our strength lies not in our technology or military might, but in our diversity, adaptability, and unwillingness to accept any fate imposed upon us." In orbit, hegemony commanders registered the broadcast, but initially dismissed it as meaningless defiance. That changed when their systems began detecting anomalies. Thousands of small-scale electromagnetic pulses precisely targeted at their landing craft's guidance systems, communication disruptions spreading through their network, and most alarmingly, evidence that humans had already begun reverse engineering components from observation posts established in surrendered territories. Back in the UN chamber, the mood shifted from despair to uncertain hope as Harrison delivered her final message. To the hegemony, I say this: you can destroy our cities, you can shatter our infrastructure, but you cannot break what makes us human. We will not kneel today. We will not kneel tomorrow. We will stand, adapt, and demonstrate why conquest is not the only path to the future. As she finished, the Secretary General stepped forward with newfound resolve. The United Nations stands with General Harrison. Earth stands united. The hegemony's response came swiftly. Dropships descended toward major cities, their hulls gleaming like polished obsidian against the dawn sky. But as they entered Earth's lower atmosphere, the first signs that this conquest would be different became apparent. In Seoul, strategically placed electromagnetic pulse devices, cobbled together from modified power station equipment, activated in sequence, creating a disruption field that sent 3 dropships veering off course. They didn't crash, their systems too advanced for complete failure, but they were forced to retreat to higher altitudes to recalibrate. Similar scenarios played out globally, not enough to repel the invasion, but enough to create confusion in the hegemony's carefully coordinated deployment. Their combat doctrine relied on overwhelming force applied with surgical precision. Now they faced 1,000 small impediments, none decisive alone but collectively forcing constant tactical reassessment. In her underground command center, Dr. Chen monitored the linguistic attack her team had launched. Precisely designed communication patterns transmitted on frequencies the hegemony used for internal coordination. The patterns exploited the translation weaknesses she'd identified, introducing concepts that created processing conflicts in their systems. "It's working," she reported, watching data streams that showed hegemony communication efficiency dropping by 18% and falling. Their translation matrix is attempting to parse concepts it wasn't designed to handle. Every adjustment they make creates new vulnerabilities for us to exploit. Harrison nodded. "Keep pushing. We don't need to shut them down completely. Just introduce enough entropy to disrupt their command structure." Around the world, the resistance continued its asymmetric approach. When hegemony ground forces secured London's financial district, they found humans using improvised tactics that defied strategic prediction algorithms. Civilians disappeared into underground tunnel systems that hadn't appeared on any scan. Critical infrastructure rerouted through backup systems the hegemony's intelligence hadn't identified. Every apparent success for the invaders revealed two new complications. Most frustrating for the hegemony commanders was humanity's seemingly innate ability to communicate and coordinate without centralized direction. Isolated groups adapted to changing circumstances, sharing effective tactics through channels that shifted faster than they could be monitored or blocked. On the flagship orbiting Earth, Supreme Overlord San Takor faced growing unrest among the coalition species. The Mithrani commander, representing the third most powerful species in the hegemony, approached with unmistakable concern. "Suppression costs are exceeding projections by orders of magnitude," the Mithrani reported, multifaceted eyes blinking rapidly in their equivalent of agitation. "The human resistance lacks conventional structure but demonstrates unprecedented adaptive capacity. Our predictive models are failing." "Adjust the models," Tehan Takor ordered. "Increase deployment of suppression forces." "With respect, Overlord, that approach is proving counterproductive. Each escalation is met with increased human innovation. They are learning from our technology at rates that violate established cognitive models for pre-spaceflight species." This was the aspect that most disturbed the hegemony leadership. Captured equipment was being disassembled, analyzed, and repurposed with alarming speed. Human scientists were making intuitive leaps that bypassed developmental stages that had taken other species centuries to navigate. In a research facility beneath the Colorado mountains, Dr. Ananya Patel exemplified this phenomenon. Her team had reversed-engineered components from a damaged hegemony scout craft, focusing not on replicating the technology, but on understanding its principles and applying them through existing human frameworks. "They've optimized their technology along a different path than we would have taken," she explained to Harrison during a secure briefing. "It's more advanced, yes, but also more specialized. We're finding ways to create hybrid systems that they wouldn't have considered, approaches that are less elegant but more adaptable." Harrison allowed herself the first genuine smile since the invasion began. They came expecting to find primitives. Instead, they found humans. 48 hours into the conflict, the pattern of human resistance had become clear enough that even the most stubborn hegemony strategists could no longer deny it. This conquest was fundamentally different. Their standard protocols, established across centuries of successful subjugation, were proving not just ineffective but counterproductive. In the secure chamber deep within the flagship, Supreme Overlord San Takor faced open dissent for the first time in his 3-century rule. "The standard conquest protocol is failing," stated the Mithrani commander, now joined by representatives from 2 other coalition species. "We must consider alternative approaches." San Takor's facial scales rippled with barely contained fury. "The protocol has never failed. The humans simply require more pressure to break. Our analysis suggests otherwise," countered the Juraxian scientist, her insectoid appendages manipulating a holographic display showing resistance patterns across Earth. Human response to increased pressure is not submission but accelerated adaptation. Each escalation produces diminishing returns while increasing our resource expenditure. The data was irrefutable. Hegemony forces controlled less territory now than 12 hours earlier, despite deploying additional resources. Human resistance had evolved from simple disruption to increasingly coordinated counteractions targeting specific vulnerabilities. Most troubling was Dr. Chen's linguistic offensive, which had spread through hegemony communication systems like a conceptual virus. Translation systems were operating at 60% efficiency and declining, forcing many units to rely on more primitive direct communication methods vulnerable to interception. There is another concern, the Kelveri strategist added, her luminescent skin pulsing with anxiety patterns. Human scientific teams are reverse engineering our technology at unprecedented rates. They appear to be converging on principles that could threaten our shield systems. Fantakor slammed a clawed hand against the command table. Impossible. A pre-spaceflight species cannot. They already have, interrupted the Juraxian, displaying sensor readings from a research facility in Switzerland. This installation has developed a rudimentary version of our phase technology, using principles our analysts didn't anticipate. They're approaching solutions from angles our science abandoned millennia ago. On Earth, this assessment was proving accurate. Dr. Patel's team had made a breakthrough by pursuing what hegemony science would consider a technological dead end. Rather than attempting to replicate their advanced shield technology directly, they had developed a countermeasure that exploited the energy fluctuations Dr. Vasquez had identified from Chile. It's not elegant, Patel explained during the emergency briefing with Harrison and other resistance leaders. Their shields operate on 11-dimensional principles. Our mathematics is just beginning to formalize. But we don't need to match their technology. We just need to disrupt it. Harrison studied the prototype, a network of devices that, when activated in sequence, could create a resonance cascade exploiting the shield fluctuations. How many can we deploy in the next 12 hours? That's the beauty of it, Patel smiled. We designed it using components already mass-produced for telecommunications infrastructure. Distributed manufacturing is already underway across 27 countries. Meanwhile, Dr. Chen had expanded her linguistic offensive into something more targeted. Working with cultural anthropologists and game theorists, she had identified communication patterns that could be directed at specific hegemony species, exploiting the hierarchical fractures in their coalition. The subordinate species respond differently to certain conceptual frameworks, she explained, particularly those related to autonomy and choice. Their translation systems filter these concepts when they originate from conquered species, but our approach bypasses those filters. Harrison nodded, seeing the strategic implications. You're not just disrupting their communications, you're offering their subjugated species an alternative perspective. Exactly, Chen confirmed. We're demonstrating that hierarchy isn't the only viable social structure for advanced civilizations. The hegemony coalition is based on domination. What if we could show them cooperation instead? The resistance had evolved from survival to something more profound, a challenge to the fundamental principles upon which the hegemony had built its empire. The breaking point came unexpectedly. Supreme Overlord Santakor, enraged by the continued resistance and growing dissent within his ranks, ordered a coordinated strike against Earth's most populous centers. The attack would be overwhelming, designed to shatter human resolve once and for all. Initiate Pacification Protocol Omega, he commanded, overriding objections from the Mithrani and Juraxian representatives. Target all major population centers simultaneously. The flagship's weapons systems came online, followed by 11 others in perfect synchronization. Energy readings spiked as the vessels positioned themselves for optimal strike coverage. Across Earth, resistance leaders watched with grim determination as their sensors detected the imminent attack. They're committing everything, Harrison observed from the command center. This is their breaking point, not ours. Activating all countermeasures, Colonel Doan confirmed, sending the signal that activated defense systems worldwide. What happened next would later be called the moment of convergence, when humanity's disparate efforts came together in unexpected harmony. As the hegemony vessels prepared to fire, Dr. Patel's resonance devices activated in sequence around the globe, creating cascading disruptions in the ship's shield harmonics, not enough to disable them completely, but sufficient to create vulnerabilities. Simultaneously, Dr. Chen's team broadcast their most sophisticated linguistic package yet, targeted communications specifically designed to affect the command structure of each vessel differently, exploiting the cultural and hierarchical differences among the coalition species. The effect was immediate and dramatic. 3 vessels, those commanded by Mithrani, Jiraxian, and Kelvari officers, broke formation, their weapon systems powering down. Communications intercepted by Earth's listening posts revealed heated exchanges between these ships and Xan Takor's flagship. "The coalition is fracturing," Chen reported, her voice tight with exhaustion but triumphant. "The subordinate species are questioning the escalation." But Xan Takor was not to be denied. The remaining 9 vessels maintained attack positioning, their weapons primed. "Proceed with the attack," he ordered. "The dissidents will be dealt with afterward." It was at this critical juncture that humanity revealed its final countermeasure, the planetary defense system, hastily assembled from repurposed satellites, ground-based installations, and reverse-engineered hegemony technology. Activated. Not a conventional weapon, but something uniquely human in concept. The system didn't target the hegemony vessels directly. Instead, it created a complex interference pattern, a technological implementation of the same principles that had made Dr. Chen's linguistic offensive so effective. It introduced unpredictability into the hegemony's targeting systems, not enough to prevent them from firing, but enough to force their automated safety protocols to engage. "They can still attack," Harrison explained to world leaders watching from secure locations, "but their systems can no longer guarantee precision. They would have to override their own safety protocols, potentially risking their own vessels." It was a quintessentially human solution, not matching the hegemony's power, but changing the parameters of the conflict itself. On the flagship, Xan Takor faced a decision unprecedented in the hegemony's conquest history. The standard protocols offered no guidance for this situation. To proceed would violate core operational safety principles established over millennia. To retreat would concede defeat to a technologically inferior species. In that moment of hesitation, the 3 dissenting vessels positioned themselves between the flagship and Earth in a clear protective stance. "This conquest violates the founding principles of the hegemony," declared the Mithrani commander on an open channel. "These humans have demonstrated qualities worthy of recognition, not subjugation. We stand with Earth." 2 more vessels broke formation, joining the protective blockade. The coalition, built on millennia of hierarchical dominance, was unraveling before a species that had refused to accept its assigned place in the galactic order. The holographic projection of Supreme Overlord Xan Takor loomed in the center of the United Nations chamber, his scaled form seeming somehow less imposing than during his first appearance 3 days earlier. Arrayed around him were representatives from 6 hegemony species, including the Mithrani, Jiraxian, and Kelvari, who had broken ranks during the final confrontation. Facing them stood General Harrison, Dr. Chen, and a carefully selected delegation representing Earth's diverse regions, cultures, and disciplines. The meeting had been arranged after 24 hours of tense negotiations following the standoff in orbit. "Your species has demonstrated unexpected capabilities," Xan Takor began, the translation still struggling with certain human concepts. "The hegemony acknowledges that standard conquest protocols are ineffective against your particular attributes. We call it humanity," Harrison replied simply. "And we're not interested in protocols, standard or otherwise. We're here to establish mutual understanding." The Mithrani representative stepped forward. "For 12,000 cycles, the hegemony has expanded through conquest and assimilation. Species either submit to the hierarchy or face extinction. None have demonstrated the particular resilience we have observed in humans. We adapt, Dr. Chen said. It's what we do. Not just biologically, but culturally, technologically, conceptually. Humanity thrives on diversity and change, the very elements your conquest protocol tried to suppress. Around the chamber, holographic displays showed scenes from the 3-day conflict, not of destruction, but of innovation. Humans of different nationalities, disciplines, and backgrounds coming together to create solutions that no single approach could have developed. The hybrid technologies that had emerged from combining Earth science with glimpses of hegemony principles. The distributed decision-making that had proven impossible to disrupt through centralized attack. What you're seeing, Harrison explained, is not just resistance. It's a fundamentally different way of existing as a spacefaring civilization. Your hegemony is built on hierarchy and specialization. Our future will be built on cooperation and adaptation. Xantacor's multiple eyes narrowed. You presume to lecture the hegemony on civilization. Your kind has barely left your atmosphere. And yet, the Juraxian scientist interjected. They have developed countermeasures to our technology that our models deemed impossible. They have revealed flaws in systems we considered perfect. Perhaps it is we who should be learning. The Supreme Overlord scales rippled with barely contained fury, but he could not deny the evidence. More concerning was the growing support for the dissident view among his own coalition. The Kelvari and Juraxian representatives were already engaging with human scientists, their natural curiosity overriding millennia of hierarchical conditioning. The hegemony withdraws its claim on Earth, Xantecor finally declared, each word clearly painful. Your species will be classified as anomalous. Non-standard engagement protocols will be developed. That's a start. Harrison nodded, but not sufficient. We propose an alternative to your withdrawal, an alliance. The chamber fell silent, even the dissenting hegemony species surprised by the offer. You would ally with those who sought to conquer you? The Mithrani commander asked. Chen stepped forward, addressing not just the commander but all the hegemony representatives. We've studied your coalition structure. The species that comprise the hegemony each have unique strengths and perspectives, yet your hierarchical system suppresses that diversity rather than harnessing it. Imagine what could be accomplished if those different viewpoints were valued equally, working in concert rather than in ranked isolation. Harrison continued, the day humanity refused to kneel wasn't just about standing against conquest. It was about standing for something better, a model of civilization where diverse perspectives strengthen the whole rather than threaten it. As she spoke, the holographic displays shifted to show Earth's variety. Its ecosystems, cultures, ideas, all thriving through their differences rather than despite them. Today, we offer the galaxy a choice, Harrison concluded, not between kneeling or fighting, but between hierarchy and harmony, between conquest and cooperation, between what has always been and what could be.